Ma poitrine, je m'incline, je fais signe, je dis. Coupones à ma bendo, coupones à ma bendo. Nani, Saidia, Nani, Saidia. Natu Saidia, batata, batoto, batoto. I wanna save it. Do it, I have to follow my way. Il faut sauver. Il faut sauver tout. Et je dis, la cat,
Yo, I regularly put my fist through walls and doors, cause then I can't take the shit no more. Everywhere I turn is mad stress on my back. I'm wrecked, and why's it gotta be like that? I wake up in the morning to my mom's nagging at me. She's never happy. I flip the table cause she slapped me. On the phone my girl's crying, telling me she's leaving. Freaking, accusing me of sleeping with Monique and Karen. She got it from my friend Sharon Donnage, who been pillar talking with a pussy in a college now. But my mind state, I'm out there. Bareface, cold with no regrets. They go to loot again, right there. I know he's packing. I swear next time I see him, best believe I'm out to jack him. Any which way, I'm all out to get mine, man, be hawking. Somewhere out there lurking in the grind. Waiting to toast the first hosts with the most shit ain't there. Cause they be the ones who's moving the goalposts. Establishments are made for the predicament. I'm seeing bright neon signs flashing through their screens. See now, I'm getting lost to this tribe of ill-putters, the rotten hooders, who got no time for no pussy footers, causing mad pains for material gains. It's a fucking damn shame playing the devil man's games. Sometimes I think society's to blame. When niggas in pain, wearing devil second names. Shit is insane, money was working in my veins. Sometimes I think society's to blame. When niggas in pain, wearing devil second names. Shit is insane, money was working in my veins. Ayo, my clique was all in, but now it's all fucked up. The Reaper dead or in jail, crackheads are mad or scuffed up. I still see a couple, but they just ain't the same. The trader in the game, danger, he was to blame. Back in 89, he introduced man to crack, and after that, what? The whole damn operation got slapped. Little fucker turned the form and beat up the whole scam. Only last year, I got my ass out the can. 2 years in a cell with somebody I never knew before my leave. I knew this nigga better than his mom's knew. 22 and doing life, but when he didn't know no better. Brother couldn't read, had me reciting all his letters. You know the shit wouldn't be writing, man. In the pen, he'd lay back, ask me to read the shit again and again. I hate the danger from the op, he used to give me the chill. For all I know, he could have had my little cause original. Still, all that's history, I got a nigga back. Nigga learn from that, I got to maintain, I can't turn back. I hear it's the same as jail beat, it's just an open air one. There ain't no prison where nobody else cares, son. Ain't nothing changed, I'm just a little older and bolder. Thoughts are colder, with my chips up on my shoulder, lay my shit low. My pillow, read the concrete, cause harm with deceit, my tolerance ain't complete. Sometimes I think society's to blame, when niggas in pain, where we get the second name. Shit is insane, what even working in my veins? Sometimes I think society's to blame, when niggas in pain, where we get the second name. Shit is insane, what even working in my veins? At times I feel the globe must be halfway to hell where it seems the only niggas doing crime is doing well. My resolution is survival at whatever it takes. Here in this jungle full of vultures, rats, hyenas and snakes. Fuck it, empty your pockets while it's changing in the dark. Try to get bright and you'll find out, man, I'm a bucket. Switching on my beats, I need from way back. So stay back, you may talk a payback, but don't you ever try to play that way. I feel my own family can fall my prey. Any which way, I'm out to make my crime pay. Cops on top, so I just moved to another slinging. Pops too much to white trash and all the brothers screams Queenia. But who that clocking from the tinted beamer be the junior done son of the done senior? He said he like my kid into a shit he wants to bring. What's that? Don't you ever try and sleep. Just cool, I said chill as I was counting the bills. It's time for real kill. But mine that's time I'm into major drug deals. From selling G's to washing apes and weight quarters. No fear for race, but I'm beside it for the night quarter. I know she's compensated, but let me hit it for the head of it. Besides enough here to open the heard of it. That's a little too much. Maybe the bubble go berserk. I fucked it. Besides it's me that's doing all the work. Now I'm the crack bean, crack seller, crack bean. I be my best customer. Know what I mean? Suddenly JD rolling in the rain and the thunder. He said there's been a blunder. The work's about a half pound thunder. Nigga, you been smoking. What you trying to say? I grabbed my weapon and smoked a little fucker away. Now I'm in it. It's all about to happen in a minute. The mob wants me dead. I push my life to the limit. Sometimes I think society's a when niggas in pain, where we never second names. Shit is insane, what are you looking in my veins? Sometimes I think society's to blame. When niggas in pain, where we never second names. Shit is insane, what are you looking in my veins?
Welcome, everybody. I am Marie-Julie Chalu, founder of Afropea and creator of this event. We listened to Bring Lac from the album Adventures in Afropea 1 by the band Zap Mama. This album was released in 1999. And we listened to Who's to Blame from the hip-hop group Crash Crew. From the album From an Afropean Perspective, released in 1995. So I wanted to start this conversation with music because because the words Afropea and Afropean have been coined by musicians, and more precisely by Marie Dawn from the group That Mama we listened to, and David Byrne from the group from the band Talking Heads. And these words are very popularized in the musical, artistic, and academic context, but not so much in everyday life. When I discovered the word Afropea in Leonora Biano's writings, I felt relieved, and I wanted to document this experience which described my situation, a Black Afro-descendant woman from Martinique, born in Paris. And this situation is linked to the French imperialism. And I therefore created a platform to document and analyze this identity, this experience, and analyze the Afro-European presences. And through this event, I wanted to foster relationship between different Afropean curators who do the same work. And I will now let Aude Konan introduce the panel. Aude Konan is an author and director. She leads a workshop on communication and diversity in the UK and in Europe. I will give you the floor, Aude.
Thank you, Marie. Welcome, everyone. I'm really glad to be here today in that space. So, I wanted to go back to the term Afropeanity because it refers to Afro-descendant people born and living in Europe, as well as the cultural, aesthetic, and political dynamics that are attached to their experiences. It is one of the many expressions of the Black diaspora in the Western context, thus corresponding to post-colonial and post-slavery logic. The concept of Afropeanity anchors the Black question in Europe by not relating it to immigration or the experiences of Afro-Americans, which Afropeans are different from. The word is linked to also other fields of research, conceptualizing the poorly documented post-colonial experiences. So what does archiving Afropea mean? What importance can the Afropean archives have among the Black Pan-African archives in general? Our conversation will end at 4 p.m. GMT +1. We'll talk for 1 hour 15, and then you'll be able to ask the panelists your questions using the chat box. So I'm really pleased to introduce the panelists. So let's start with Mohamed. Mohamed is a social worker and coordinates the Girls and Women's Division of Football Club, Pirates. For past years, he has been contributing mostly in envelope through his work as a writer, youth worker, DJ selector, and organizer of events, both in the cultural and youth work scenes. Karis is a Jamaican-British photographer, archivist, and curator based in Hertfordshire, UK. Currently full-time in her profession, Karis has worked with Uber, Levi's, Days, Go Up magazine, and more. Julia is an Afro-Spanish art historian, art educator, and curator. Through art education and art history, Julia works on anti-racism and intersectional feminism, as well as the real accessibility of all people to culture. Marie is an artist and curator. She has created multiple cultural projects such as Afropea, which is this one, Zik Vintage, or even Noir Cinema. She enjoys doing research and is passionate, among other things, about social sciences, Black studies, Afro-diasporic cultures and stories. Aminata is a historian with Belgian and Gambian roots and a passion for research. She is 1/3 of the founding members of the first Black Student Union in Flanders, AYO, African Youth Organization, and co-coordinates Black History Month Belgium. Iris is a communication specialist, researcher, creative, and entrepreneur with Cabo Verde and Spanish roots. She's based in London and freelancing in different communications-related roles. Our client lists include top African and European brands and professionals such as the award-winning Ghanaian British architect Sir David Ajayi Obiyi, Inditex, Max Hoza by La Duma, TED conferences and Vice News. So, now that we're all here, let's start with our questions. First of all, I'm really interested in learning more about you. So, could each of you introduce your work? Who wants to start first?
I will, or yes? Okay. The project Afropea, it's a documentation platform about Afropeanity. It's a place of artistic curation, of archiving, and of analysis about Afropean creativities and identities. And I'm genuinely, as you said, Aude, I'm genuinely interested in Afro-diasporic experiences, post-colonial experiences. And yeah, well, it's, yeah, I can introduce my work like that for the moment.
Thank you. Who's going next?
I think maybe Mohamed and I'll start, and Mohamed can chip in. So we both are the founders and the coordinators of Black History Month in Belgium, and our project is very much about, in a sense, also documenting and archiving the lived experiences of Black people in Belgium, not only directly related to Belgium's own colonial past, but the different migration streams of Black people that have come to Belgium, what their experiences are like. So every yearly in March, we commemorate and think deeply about issues related to being Black in Belgium, and always following a central theme. And the theme this year was collecting our past and our present, thinking about what it would look like for us to have a Black archives in Belgium, a place that would be a physical space and or a digital space where people can find out more about what it's like to be Black in Belgium.
Yeah, I think you've said like all the essentials when it comes to work we do with Black History Month. I think from my social work background, the most interesting thing has been like, how do Black people in Belgium come together, and how do we create spaces for ourselves, because in the work that we do, it tends to be drawn easily into, but are you doing anti-racism work or something like that? Well, why we're like, nah, we're just focusing on us and trying to see what's important to us. And unfortunately, racism is part of that spectrum, but there's like so much more to just the experience of a Black person in whatever space. So I think most of the projects we together have created, or that I've created along the road, have been focusing on these aspects of not only saying you're against something, but just creating something for yourself. And I think that's why we were like very much interested in this conversation, because I feel no matter where we are as Black people, we're always looking for these ways to collect what we're doing as a sign of just being, and then not forgetting like the beautiful elements as well. So yeah.
So I'm a photographer and curator, and the founder of Bumpkin Files, which explores Black Britain outside of London. So usually when we speak about like Black Britain, it's always very like London centric, and there's a lot of misconceptions about, you know, Black people who don't live in like big cities, or they live in like more green and rural areas. And it's just important to, again, like document and keep track of what's going on as well, just to stop history repeating itself and things getting whitewashed. And as someone from like out of London as well, I just thought it was important, especially if I own something powerful like the camera. I just decided, you know, let me start this project, and yeah, and now we're here.
Julia or Iris?
I'm going to start first, as Julia is a collaborator of this project called Afroespaña. I think Afroespaña was meant to be a celebration. I didn't know how to explain how I was Spanish and African at the same time, after living, not just only living in London, but traveling even in Africa. I would never be able to explain what it is. It's never enough saying you have a Spanish parent and an African Cape Verdean father. It's just, a very difficult identity, and I thought it wasn't just about me. There was so many different mix of children like me, Spanish as in culturally, by birth, by choice also, and I chose to let it be as it was and to show how it was like for other people like me. So for me, the archive in Afroespaña was, I think it's the end product of an idea that was an event, a physical event where I could invite some people from Spain and I could just let them talk and show whatever they wanted to show about what it was for them to be African and Spanish at the same time here in London. So I think I think Julia came to the rescue in a few times as an art historian, and she's been very helpful with the project. And this is why I wanted her to be in this event, because she has a very good awareness of what it is, what I am doing, which is maybe technically I don't really know what the archive was and the magnitude it could have and the importance that's here is Julia to carry on.
So all of you have in common the fact that you have created archives around Afropea, but I wanted to know how and when did you first hear about that concept of Afropea?
I can start. I heard about it in the writings of Leonora Mianos, as I said, in her book Habiter la frontière. And after I discovered the work of Johnny Pitts, the website Afropean, and also the work of the scholar Alana Lockwood, who created the event Black Europe Body Politics with the concept of Afropean decoloniality. And so I wanted to document that because it's what I experienced. And I think it's, in Afro-diasporic studies, there are not so many works or research on Afropean identities. And perhaps because most of Afropeans identify themselves to their parents' countries. And but what connects Afropeans and Afro-Americans, I think that they are in a political contradiction because being both the victim and the beneficiary of world system set by the West. And because Black diaspora in the global North are beneficiaries of the neo-colonial and imperialist policies of the countries in which they lived, but at the same time, they're living the systemic oppressions of these European countries. So yeah.
I first heard of Afropean again through like Instagram. So starting up the Bumpkin Files Instagram page, I come across again Johnny Pitts' work, Afropean, heard that term, researched his work, and then I come across Afropea as well. And it just brought a perspective on like how collectively we can identify, because again we do usually identify with like where our parents or grandparents are from, but I feel like sometimes there's like a bit of like a displacement when trying to explain and articulate who we are and where we really belong. So yeah, mainly through the work I do as well.
I think I first heard about the term in debates about like in Belgium, we're still searching for the right word to describe Black people, because of like the migration histories we've had here. So it's like one of these words that recently came into the conversation. So as recent as 2017-ish, that was like the first time I could really hear the word, because before that you would read it somewhere, but it was still something far from the words we were using here to describe Black people. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I follow Mohamed, and indeed, I think it's a word that is still you hear it more and more, but very much in certain yes sectors, I guess, more so than in others. And but I think in general in Belgium there is this discomfort people feel with how should we name ourselves as a collective. So so whenever a new term comes up, you always have the ones who are like, oh yeah, this feels right for me, and then others who are very much against being named in a certain way. So yeah, it's like Afro-Belgian is something that you still won't hear that much, and Afropean as well. But more and more it is becoming something that is discussed in Black spheres.
Iris, Julia?
Yeah, it's the first time I come across the term Afropea through Marie Julie. And I was aware of the Afropean concept, but at the same time, because there's so many, well, we are all so different. I've been living in Paris. I've been quite a few times for long periods in Belgium as well, Switzerland. And yes, we are very different. It's just obvious that it's not just a matter of language. Also, there is a component where it comes to play your African part, or that part of your family. It also is important to see which country of Europe or which country colonized that country as well, from your parental side and all your family. So we will all do different things. We not just Afropeans as in a unit. It's not like a flat concept. And I think Afropea is actually depicting and exploring what it is actually and where and how for different people.
Yes, there's something pretty complex about that that Afropean identity, because it will change from a country to the other, as we know. How is, or how are each one of your initiatives documenting Afropeanity?
The term, when we say Black Europe, it's we're saying it's a lot of different experiences. There are people born in Europe, but not or who have immigrated in Europe, or people from Africa or the Caribbean. So yeah, there are so many different experiences in that term, Black Europe. And with that project, I wanted to document Afropean experiences because, as I said, I am Afropean. I can say that, and I wanted to document it and to understand more my situation here, and it's because of the French colonialism, imperialism, and there is a difference because Afropean experiences are racialized. We are racialized very soon, even before our birth, because when we see how Black women are treated in hospitals when they are pregnant, so racism hits us very early, and it's a particular experience. But our experience is not only about racism, but it's a big part of it, well, I think. But we have to, with that word, I think we can, yeah, we're trying to find something positive to it in a way, I think. Oh, yeah.
I think we have not reached this point yet where we're like doing it, because we're as an initiative, when we started with Black History Month, we already had a very hard time establishing it in Belgium with a very small team, and we started at the uni as students who just wanted to create this space and this month. So the first step for us was really in the Belgian context, making it clear why we needed such a month. So we really had to prove ourselves to our various communities, because people were afraid, like, okay, are you guys just gonna do something American in our context? What does that mean? So we had to break these barriers that you have. I think also you do have with the word Afro, Belgian, Afropean, where in Belgium there's this fear of Americanizing Blackness. I don't know how that is in other countries, but in Belgium, that's a legitimate issue with most of the things that happen. So we really had to um, bring the people into what we are creating, and showing them first, like, okay, so Black History Month Belgium follows a tradition that indeed was created by Carter G. Woodson, but in its root, we are going beyond not only like this commercial version of what Black History Month means. We're going way beyond that. The month is in our hands as a community. We are the ones organizing it. We are the ones who are choosing the partners. We are the ones who decide what the playing field will be every year. So once that, I think this year was like the first year where you could really feel that people who in the first 2-3 years were like, I don't know, were really openly celebrating and like, oh my gosh, it's March, it's Black History Month. And for us, I think that was like the first acknowledgement of certain people who openly and behind the scenes had been like, I don't know. So we've had to bypass that first, and I think now we're in this stage where we've always wanted to because but Ami and I are like we really love working together with other people. So for us, was like, okay, we've now established it in Belgium. So, okay, let's look up and see who's doing what in Europe. And we've started reaching out to other Black History Month initiatives and just trying to connect and see what they are doing. How can we learn from them? What can we learn as well in that process towards them? So I think it's only in the coming phase of our initiative that we will be able to really go above the Belgian sphere, because we've had so much work on the ground here, establishing what we're doing and building and gaining the trust from the community.
Maybe I'll just add to that it is, I think, for Belgium, for our context, it is also interesting in Belgium, for those who know it, is very complicated with Flanders and Wallonia and Brussels, and but I think with like Brussels, you know, being like the capital of Europe, you do have a bit of this sphere where you have a lot of Afropeans, and we do see differences when we look at events, depending on in which city we're organizing it, that the question of Europe is more prominent in cities like Brussels, and where so it's definitely something that we're starting to think about, but I think it is really about seeing what different communities are we part of, just locally, nationally, and internationally across borders. So it is definitely something, like Mohamed said, by like something we want to work on to because it is important to have this solidarity, I think, especially in Europe, because I think Mohamed more so knows how much money there is as well in Europe, so-called, to fight you know, racism and all that. But it's about how can we, as Black people as well, work together to make sure that we get what we should get as well from our governments, but also beyond that from the European government as well.
For me, Bumpkin Files are still growing, but the main initiative for it was to bridge gaps between different Black communities. Again, because of like misconceptions and like lack of media representation, it's very rare when we even like look and explore about Black, like British history and culture. But again, whenever it is very like one-sided, it's just very central to the capital city of England. And for me, community is like super, super important. And especially as well, we've just gone through the pandemic and there's a lot of disconnects also, but a lot of people are paying attention to just certain things. So just bridging the gaps and even just creating more understanding and more solidarity, like between different communities. You know, when you go to Wales, Cardiff especially, you know, they have the oldest Black community. And I think Cardiff was even like the first multicultural nation like in the world. But we don't really hear about things like that. And it's just so important for people to have an understanding of one another and also support each other, whether it is through, you know, supporting like other like Black businesses or just supporting communities if something over there is going on with like funding and like preserving information and everything. So yeah, that's my main initiative for that.
As I said before, Afroespaña was meant to be a physical interaction, a physical space where we could just be together under the same space. And obviously all this pandemic has delayed many of these plans, but I think it wouldn't, for me, it wouldn't make much sense if it was just a digital resource. I think it's much needed that we just get together to celebrate and not just to complain or to ask or beg for representation, because we can just be and represent us with us. We don't need to do it for the outside. And I think Afroespaña is a bit like growing as a community. Thank you to Instagram, but the goal is to do this that we are doing, like people talking and people asking questions to each other, but as much as possible amongst us, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Many of you have mentioned how Afropeanity informs your practice and how it's important to create archives that informs the Afropean presence in your respective countries, and how it's important to have that for the community and for the many communities in over different countries, and how to bridge gaps between the stereotypes and what different Black communities are living. But if we go to the root of it in terms of your in terms of the archives, what is your archiving practice like? What it is made of? What is it that you collect?
So one part of my archiving practice is documenting visually. So photography is my practice. I do this full time. And even before the idea of Bumpkin Files, it was my priority to document Black people just across the diaspora. And then as time went on, I just realized it would be good to document more of my communities. And, you know, that's what birthed Bumpkin Files. So first it was a discussion, just to, I'm sorry, first it was a small project where I just scanned family photo albums because I have like so many at home. Just to spark up a conversation and open dialogue. And then it grew into a photography project. And then eventually I was doing research just to see like how accessible it is to find images of like different Black British communities. And then I decided to start collecting. So the collection is still very, very, very small, but the goal is to continue collecting and growing the archive. But my main practice is photographing, as it just keeps a record of what's happening in the present. You know, it's good to search for the past, but it's also important, and just as important, to make sure like you're documenting the present as well. So people don't have to keep going back to try and dig deep, finding certain information.
Yeah, I think even though we follow that mindset as well, like even though it's called a Black History Month, and I think a lot of people expect it to be solely about history. I think for a lot of people think that it's because of Black History Month, they're going to learn more about the history of Africa. You have a lot of that as well. But for us, it is really about archiving the complexities of just Black life in Belgium. And I think one of the ways we hope to do that, because as we said, mentioned, I think the archive is a future project that we're working towards. But the idea is very much to have all different ways of, all different kind of material or documentary or visual fragments where you can still see these traces of how life was, and then it can go as far back or as recent actually as just yesterday, an hour ago, so very close to the present as well. But yeah, we hope to do that through again, like photography, but also all like what music is being made, what are filmmakers doing, what are different kind of artists, but also just realities of people that are not necessarily known because of their profession, but just live everyday lives. We something that is very important for us, and we always work on to expand, is to have like a wide intergenerational range, and to really reach the older generations as well, and to have those kind of dialogues. But sometimes it's also interesting to see how certain objects or certain buildings that hold special meaning, foods, clothing. It's really about yeah, not looking at an archive necessarily or archiving in a traditional European sense, but also seeing like, okay, if it's about basically the past and the present realities that we have, it's not only going to be, you know, on paper, and a lot of times it is those objects, for example, that really last the longest and where people feel most connected to. So yeah, it is a work in progress, but I think this month was also very much about thinking about it and making sure that it is as community, as Black communities in Belgium, everyone has thinks about it together in a way so that when it's there, it feels like it's something that we yeah, isn't just the way we create it or the way we go about it is informed by ideas of plenty people, different people that that think about what needs to be archived, how, why, etc.
Sorry, I just wanted to add as well, with my archiving practice also, which I did forget to mention, it is used as a community resource as well. So I created a website, and a part of the website has a directory of like different Black like businesses. So from like groceries, clothing, archive platforms, etc. Just to again connect the dots to help to help bridge the gap. And moving forward as well, having physical spaces when the pandemic like ends as well, and showcasing other creative people like myself, but also my aim is to create projects where I can bring in like other people like myself, because I believe if I'm breaking down doors, bringing as many people with me, bring as many Black people with me, and like working on projects where it champions voices, or this even gives opportunities for Black people outside of the main city to be involved in creative projects, because London is the epicenter of like everything like creative, you know, the creative jobs. People move to London, that's like a normal thing. But allowing to, like in my practice, bring people on board for projects like on our doorstep or in places that we wouldn't really usually create, just allowing people just to enter so they can kind of continue sharing that narrative, but just being themselves in these spaces, just making it a lot more accessible as well. So.
Mohamed, do you want to add on that?
Yeah, I was thinking like the luxury we've had is maybe because we've like been able to see the Black archives in Amsterdam that started a few years ago. We've been able to visit the one in Brixton, and we know about the one or two in Germany as well. So we've been blessed in that sense to like look towards these as examples. And for us, I think in that sense, the steps we're trying to take towards that is like, okay, how can we get in touch to these institutions now at this point? But also just like Karis, like what you were saying, it's super interesting because the way you started, it can be inspiring to someone who we would probably have in our team along the way as an here is someone that started their work in the UK like this. It would be interesting for our own archive here in Belgium. So how do we create pathways into sharing and making sure, like for instance, you and what the knowledge you've gained and bring that here so that people we have here can gain from that. I think that's something that's inherently got, it's built in what we're trying to do, because we don't have this idea of like, we just need to figure it out ourselves. We have this idea of like, yeah, there are people who have probably done it before, so who's been doing it? Let's get in touch with them and let's bring them in, and let's just have this flow of like togetherness, whilst everyone is being great in what they do, but knowing that there's a way we need to always have in mind, and that's clearing this pathway for generations behind us. Because in Belgium, that's like the biggest issue we've had. You had generations in the 90s, 2000s to like 2010-ish, who did a lot of work, but you can't find it. It's like you need to know some old guy or some old woman somewhere that's just gonna be like, oh yeah, there we used to have a cafe there, and that was the spot to be. And you'll be like, huh, really? I could never know. So it's like this thing where we are lucky to know like some of these people. So for us, it's also this responsibility of like, okay, whatever we're building now and whatever knowledge there's still out there we can bring in, we need to find a way to connect it to the generation now, but the generation that's now like 17, 18, 19 years, so that you have this continuation in what you're doing. So when we're not here, or whenever we decide to do other things with our lives, the work and the importance of the work for the community still remains.
I really like what every single one of you have said about archives, the fact that archives don't just document the past, but they also document the present, the fact that it's there for the community and the community can contribute, and the fact that there are ways to foster relationships with other communities by inspiring and just creating a conversation. I was wondering what makes something an archive for you?
Um, yeah, I was thinking about these questions for a few days, this one in particular, because when we think of archive, or what they've told us is maybe some files and some folders and some tangible thing that you can give a value and you can reference and you can use and you can share and showcase. But I think that some of the, for example, what I've been doing with Afroespaña has not been tangible because it's just been virtual. And I think it's great how the archive has the function, has this cohesive function. So it's working like some kind of glue between us, and also is rewriting or retelling the narrative of roots, because we've got our roots are obviously not wholly in Europe. Most of us are children of immigrants. So the roots are really far. Sometimes if we go back to those roots and we look at pictures and we look at visual reference or music, we know where it comes from. But I think archiving now, as we are doing it, it does this magic, which is we are creating our own roots. We are kind of letting you know that I feel like you are, and we have this massive, building this massive tree in common with our own roots, because not all roots are valid for all of us.
Yeah, and archives build communities, build genealogies, and we are giving legitimacy to our existence when we are archiving them. So it's to giving values to something, and yeah, it's empowering also, I think.
Yeah, archiving to me is keeping record of things and keeping track of things and creating a bigger picture and reminding people, because oftentimes we do forget origins of things, or we just forget things. And it's also a way again to bring people together. So a few years ago, this is even before I come up with Bumpkin Files, I was looking at the work of a Canadian photographer called Jun Lee. He's African American and I think he has Chinese heritage. And he was walking through a neighborhood, southern of America, and he come across loads of Polaroid images like on the floor, just abandoned. And I think this was around the time, like shortly after Katrina. Obviously a lot of families had to get up and flee and leave everything. So he found all these images on the floor and he decided just to collect them. And he went on eBay and like he discovered that again, loads of people were selling like Polaroid images. And all the images that he found also, which I forgot to mention, there were just of Black families, Black joy, like all these things. So he collected thousands of images and over time he started exhibiting them. And through these exhibitions, a lot of people were reconnected to the photos that they had lost. And great stories have come from it. So in a sense, archiving and just providing accessible information also, because as well, in the West, when we think about history, the gatekeepers are always, you know, white middle class men, and people kind of shy away from historic topics. So I think this archiving in general and allowing it to be accessible will spark like interest in people to seek, without feeling intimidated or without feeling like, you know, I'm not allowed to. So yeah.
I mean, what you said, Karis, is really spot about the fact that, yeah, archiving is collecting, and that you really, yeah, you can start a conversation, you can talk about the past, about the future. And you've also mentioned something that's very spot on, obviously, the fact that so much about history is being kept by middle class white men, and that's who holds the knowledge and also the power, because who can tell these kind of stories and who has the power to tell the stories can tell the stories in a different way. So I wanted to go back to every single one of your Black identities for the panel. And I wanted to know, and for you to explain to me in your own words, how have your Black identities, and I use plural because so many of us are at the intersection of multiple identities. We're not just Black, we're many different things. But how has it led you to launch these initiatives, your archives?
For me, the Afro-Spanish identity is not something recent, but has a very influential historical baggage behind it. So it's important to know that baggage not only the identity as something of nowadays. Spain has always have been a mestizo nation, and through even the culture or urban planning, we can take into account the African Afro descendant present in our territory. But the structural basins cause that today neither in the history books or in the educational centers mention this fact that is something so essential and so important in our roots, not only for Afro-Spanish, for the all the population of Spain. So for our blackness, we want to make visible that what is also ours, which belong to our nation. We are African Spanish, but also we are from here. The root, the African root is everywhere, in the language, in the art history, in the words we say, because the word has a lot of Arab roots. So for that reason, the archive is a fundamental tool, not only to carry out this idea, but to demonstrate the lack of content in Spanish formal education, because Spanish has this history, but the education system has does a lot of work to invisibilize this history. So the archive is not only a dissemination tool for African or Afro descendant in Spain. So it's intrinsically a didactic resource.
Yes, I'd just like to add that it's very important to think that the Spanish case is a very different one to the rest of the European countries, because Spain does have, as Julia said, I'd say a 90% mixed population. I don't think there's a lot of Spanish people that could right now take even though they identify themselves as Spanish, and they don't let us identify ourselves as Spanish because we are blacker, but their blood is also very African. So the idea of identity is to, that brings, for example, if you, can I share the screen and show you? Oh, no, I can't. Well, or we had some.
If you can do it now.
Yeah, it's just quickly sharing. Can I? Okay, I don't think I've got settings to share my screen, but I think Julia has something different to show you about Spanish identity and African Spanish identity, and how it's so linked. It's intrinsical. Like being Spanish nowadays it cannot take away any bit of Africanity, from the language to the architecture, the urban planning, the food, the music. Even flamenco music has a root in Senegal. So it's also a reminder of identity for the ones that think we are not Spanish, or we don't have the right to be Spanish, even African Spanish. And yeah, that is a reminder for those as well, of their own identity, because we are African Spanish, but they are also Iberian or Spanish Africans. So yeah, that's I think some of the titles have been translated in English, so you can, but if you are interested in this, you can ask Julia to share these slides with you after. But yeah, this is there is a journalist in Spain called Lucía Beaumont. She always says something, and since she said it the first time, that sentence stuck in me. She always says, "We've always been there." Black people has always been in Spain. We've always been there. You can see from the beginning of So that identity that we don't have because they don't let us, that I think that's what motivates archiving and sharing the archives and going into these conversations. And I think this is a rare case. In Europe, not all countries have that strong root with Africa, genetically speaking. So yeah.
Yeah, and okay, and thank you for that. And for answering to the question, archiving Black experiences, despite the systemic racism that give less value to our lives and to our cultures, is very important. And as I said, to archive is giving value, and it's and we, because it's generally speaking, I think that Black experiences, Black stories testify in a radical way how this world was built, how this world was was built, and it's important to talk about it, because to analyze and to talk about this experience, because Black experiences are, how to tell it, so archiving Black experiences, it's very, like I said, despite the archiving Black experiences, despite the systemic racism that give less value to our life and cultures, it's important. And that's what I wanted to say.
So my family are from Jamaica, and the reason why there are so many West Indian people in England and the UK, mainly because of the colonial ties with Europe and Britain, especially as a Jamaican. But the Windrush, it's just like a mass migration where like my grandparents and great grandparents generation were quote unquote invited to UK to build up everything after the World War. So we've had presence in the UK for so long, and you know, I feel like West Indians kicked down a lot of doors in terms of like bringing in new laws, like racial laws. There was a lot of boycotts, there was a lot of riots, there was a lot of hardship. It was very hostile when they first come about, and they couldn't open up, you know, they couldn't open up banks. So collectively as a community, they used to have something called like the partner, where they would all put in money like every week or every month, and then you'll have people will take turns to take a big chunk of the money, and that's how they built communities. So as someone who is a descendant of that, it's just important for me to pay homage and even actively actively show honor as well, because there was so much sacrifice like my grandparents and great grandparents had gone through to make sure, like, you know, they picked up this stuff and come to England and worked to provide. So I think the benefits of that for them, because for me, I'm just very aware that, okay, like now that I'm here, just making sure like I'm doing well, but also making sure like everything that they've done like isn't in vain. So yeah, so that's how my identity kind of plays a part in like archiving, and just even recognizing the importance of just, again, keeping track of things as well, people before me, because they sacrifice so much.
Yeah, I think for me, it's been mostly just so and whites, and my dad is Gambian, and so yeah, I think I've always had very much this experience of being both African and European, both Belgian and Gambian. And but still, at the end of the day, my experience just being in Belgium is very much being seen as a woman that is a Black mixed race Black woman, and I think for us, for Mohamed and I, it's also interesting to just see when we look at Black in Belgium, that people maybe immediately think about colonial connections in Congo or Rwanda, Burundi, and for us, it's really also about showing how you have that, but you also have people that relate in different ways. Their African Black identity and their Belgian identity, how those meet, and how that formed your experiences. And I think in a lot of ways, when you're a Black person in Belgium, that it's like it's kind of a identity that they don't really want to look at, because of course, and with they, I mean institutions or government, because of course it's confrontational, because it makes them meet again with race thinking, and especially in Belgium, we try to pretend that we don't do that anymore. So I think whenever you kind of say like, oh, okay, but we do share certain experiences just because we are identified and experience the world as a Black person. For people that can be very threatening, because I think sometimes it's more comfortable to think like, oh, it's only people that have struggled only because of the colonial history, and that's in the past. Other Black people here would not have it as bad, because if to recognize that would be to look at other things that are more just based on the present realities, which of course tie back to the colonial past, but are very much active now, and have an impact on a lot of people that have darker skin. So yeah, I think Belgium is, and a lot of places in Belgium are still very, very white. I think so. My experience has always been growing up in a lot of very white spaces, especially when it comes to education. So I think that also made it important for me to just have this to really center Blackness in a Black space, and not center Blackness in a white space, and to have like that one diversity, that one standing out, but actually that you don't really stand out, at least not because of having a darker skin and African features.
Thank you. I'm really struck by what you've all mentioned. Aris and Hoya, I learned so much about the fact that the population in Spain is so mixed, which are some of those facts that we're not necessarily aware of in France. Karis, what you've mentioned about the Windrush, I was already aware of the history. Obviously, I'm stuck because of the similarities. I mean, Marie would explain that much better than me, but there was a French equivalent of the Windrush. It was a Beaumont, which was, tell me if I'm wrong, probably in the 50s, where French Afro-Caribbean population were being asked to move to France to build the country as well. Even when you've mentioned Parda, I was aware of it because I'm Ivorian, and in Ivory Coast we got something similar called tontine, where people just pitching some money. And I don't know if it's called the same in over West African countries, but it's really striking that we have so many similarities. I already knew, but it's just great to hear about it. And the fact that Aminata mentioning how education is so wide and how there are so many wide spaces. It is true. It is also a part of the Afropean. It's also a part of the Afropean identity. And in that respect, I do find it wonderful that you are creating online archives for that. And I wanted to go back about it. The fact that you're creating an online space. How viable it is to create an online archives about facts of the past and the present and maybe sometimes the future, knowing how volatile internet can be as not so much a medium but as a space.
I think we're at a time with social media where people are actively seeking and building online. So I think sometimes that gives us the go to be like, comfortable to actually start up something, even if it might receive backlash or, negative reception. But seeing the archive, again, Black archives, which is still a very American archive and space, created by an African American, but just seeing how big their audience is and just the audience from all around the world, and it does showcase like other people in the diaspora. So I think I've come across a few like pictures of Black European people on that space as well. This is all about the diaspora. So just seeing like how big the audience is, it just shows you there is a demand for this. People are seeking, people are trying to discover and learn more about one another, especially, some people have a very Pan-Africanist like ideology, and it's just like a perfect way to do so. And even in the context of Archive in Black Britain, there are a few like archives or just platforms based around that. But again, it is still very like London centric, and it is really to do with just in the past, just lack of seeing it. And some people, again, because everyone's so disconnected, some people probably do desire to create content or showcase something that is like, based in like Manchester or Gloucestershire or whatever, but they don't have the connections there, so it just makes it a lot harder. So yeah, just seeing other existing like Black historical platforms just encouraged me more to do the same, because it seems to be doing so well. There is actually a demand for it. So yeah.
I mentioned before the organic need that we all have, even though we've all created this, and it is quite sustainable to be and to exist in the virtual life. But I think the only way to make archives more alive would be to also see more publications that could be used as materials for education. Because if systematically history books do not include us, we might have to start creating our own materials. And if they don't want to include them in those curriculums, I'm talking now from a parent perspective, I want to have those materials. I don't want to, well, I am creating them now because I don't have them, but I have to create materials for my child to know that this English British king wasn't a good king. It was an investor on human trafficking, and that this castle is not a magnific architectural showcase. It's something made with the blood and sweat of our ancestors. And it's not to say that these castles, these buildings aren't good or aren't beautiful. And it's not to say I'm not visiting it, but they need to know why it exists and where it comes from. So I think to make archives fully useful, especially when we network, because we are all archiving and collecting and telling our stories, we need to as I think Mohamed said it at the beginning, we're doing it, but we need to make sure it can be done when we have to stop doing it. So the best way sometimes is documenting even more and in a more tangible way, which is real textbooks and real things that we can touch, that someone can say, this is what you have to study to learn about France. This is part of France's history. This is part of Spain's history. This is part of Belgium's social studies or geography, and so, yeah, that is taking them beyond the digital.
I'm using internet because it's the only space I have access to at a lower cost. So now I'm doing it, but I would like later to do some publications, but I have to get money to do it. So yeah, that's the problem of the capital, you know. So internet for the moment, it's the only space I can use to express myself and my community.
Yeah, sorry, Aminata, do you want to go on?
No, I just want to say that yeah, we don't have, I think, that much to add because we don't so much have a digital archiving practice. So yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to bounce off that because yeah, Aris and Mohamed, I've mentioned the need to have potentially something beyond the digital space when it comes to educational products and educational tools to use. So my next question is really about the next, not so much the next step, but in terms of if you're interested in moving your archive beyond the digital space, would you work with institutions to make your archives long-lasting? And some of you might have already worked with institutions. But how would you work knowing also how wide these spaces are and who owns the knowledge? I'm really looking forward to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, a plan is to work alongside other existing institutions. So in the UK, in London, we have BCA, which is, I think it's the Black Cultural Archive. And they have a building and it's a museum and they have like all information. Autograph as well is a good platform. They do archiving stuff, but they also do like exhibitions and like other present things and support artists. And for me, in terms of bridging gaps, doing like projects that contributes to these buildings. So when people are visiting these very, very visible buildings, they can see, oh, okay, they can see the bigger picture and like a wider perspective. Because I think a couple of people have said it is still, there's like a lot of things to do with London. So that's a plan for me to do, and even working alongside like other Black British platforms. So again, through photography, like doing photographic projects where I'm helping create content. So not only that I'm pushing it on my side, but they're pushing it to their audiences. If it is, you know, very like London, it's very like Birmingham. Again, just helping other platforms to tell stories on a wider scale, but me as a photographer and as somebody who has this platform, stepping in and helping provide that so they can, and even encouraging them to create more content. So, you know, because this isn't even a one-person job, like it takes many people. So as long as I can inspire or spark an interest with other people when they do the work, it's a domino effect, it will spread. So
yes, I think that someday that moment will come, and when the archive will have to be institutionalized, but unfortunately, this is a process that we must be paid through to legitimize our project, because in our country it is important to institutionalize the project, because there is a problem, because the institutions tend to appropriate our work. That is an important part. As it is said, the archive could serve as an educational element, thinking mainly in Black childs and teens who face the racist academic system in our country. And this is important not only for empower their identity, but also to find positive references, because in our culture, in TV show, for example, there are diversity, but they are only negative reference, with a lot of stereotypes. And it is important that in Spain there are Black professionals that have organization, but they don't have the power as the white institutions. So it's a really difficult work. Also because the diversity in Spain is a topic theme nowadays, and the institutions tend to appropriate our work. So we must to be there, and we must to film, to have the control of our project, because this is a really big problem. In Spain have a very interesting project as Afroespaña, and don't institutionalize, because we can be scared about some institution appropriate our work and our ideas. So
yes, that's a danger to work with institution. Normally, we should be able to work with institution because they depends on public money, so on our money. But we have to, we must be able to organize ourselves against institutional racism that devalues or appropriates our culture, and as you said. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I can only add to what has been said. For us, like we work with institutions a lot. We're not funded by the government, and for us, it's really important when we work with institutions or any other partners that we remain on the freedom to do our events the way we want to do them, and also that in any partnership we gain more out of it than them. So that's very important for us. And I think when we look at the archive now, it is important for us to have a space that is really Black owned and not in a white space, because even though that's harder, there are a lot of white institutions like, oh yeah, please just come and do it here, but it is a way of taking ownership over something that is not theirs. And for us, even if it's harder and will take more time, we want to, because it's important to work towards having your own space. In Belgium, we don't have that yet, and I think it's great to see, for example, in the Black Cultural Archives, that you have a building, and we do think that is very important. So the work we see or the collaborating we see with institutions, it's more so like, okay, if you really, you know, want to help out and you want to walk the talk, then yeah, you can help us out in this way or that way by financially supporting, helping us, or by putting in your resources that that you get and we don't, so to help us out. But yeah, I think it's just something you have to be very vigilant about working with institutions. And one way that has been proven to be helpful for us is really to see, because you know, a lot of times you see it like a partnership, a win-win, 50-50, you both get something out of it. But especially going into it, if you go into a partnership with a white institution as a person of color, as a Black person, as someone who whose identity is marginalized, you need to make sure that it is not 50-50, but that you get more than they get out of it. And yeah, so that is, I think, once when we started having that mindset and acting on that when it came to partnerships, that's when we really started to see that who wants to work with us, first of all, what their motives really are, and we start to see that we also got more out of it without all the training, the training and the that you do have working with white institutions. It's not easy, so yeah.
Thank you. I'm really struck by the fact that depending on which European countries we are from or we live in, the ability to find Black archives and Black cultural spaces would be there, or it would be a struggle. And I find it really interesting because Julia mentioned that in working with institutions also means that sometimes they will simply steal your work, which is something Marie and I had a conversation about not too long ago. And what everyone has explained about the fact that in some countries some spaces exist. For example, when I covered the Black Cultural Archives in Britain, I was really glad to find that space because such a space doesn't exist yet in France. And I remember thinking, oh well, maybe that's because the Black British presence or Black people in Britain presence might be bigger. And then turned out that I realized that actually there are more people in France than in the UK. And I remember being struck because I am really thinking that there's something to tie again to our respective countries or the countries where we live, their colonial pasts and their history of slavery, and what it means with having sometimes some Black culture center or some Black archives being institutionalized or being not. So one thing that I really would be interested in knowing from all of you is, what are the relationships in your mind between your respective countries, colonial past, and history of slavery? What I mean by respective countries can be the country you're from or the country you live in if it's not the same.
In Spain, Spain was the last country to abolish slavery of Europe in 1886, and nobody knows that is also in the first decades of 20th century. There were still people who have been enslaved alive, and their direct descendants live mainly in the region of Andalusia in the south of Spain. And their stories have been invisibilized also by themselves, because all the time they have a fear, and they must hide their Afro-descendant identity. And it is a fact, not only the invisibility of the history of slavery in Spain, Also, the history of African and Afro-descendant roots in Middle and Modern Ages in Spain. Also, Spain has a strong colonial past, as well as we said, in territories such as Equatorial Guinea and Sahara. And there are a lot of families that are nationalized Spanish, but we, I include myself, feel like foreign in our country. So our families, these families have been always in a limbo. In I don't know what I am. I feel foreign in my country, but this is my country. This also, it can be the only country that I know, and I have lived. I have been lived in this country. So also there is administrative limbo, mainly for the families of Spanish colony of Sahara, because now there is a difficult situation, and there is a lot of people that has born in Sahara when it a Spanish colony, but they don't have any rights in Spain. They don't have even neither identity. They are in an administrative limbo, in an identity limbo, and this is really important because not only for make your life normal, so it's also important for the mental health to a person. Also, Spain has a lot of economic relations, mainly with Equatorial Guinea, and the problems, all these kind of problems, there are like a secret, and neither the newspaper, the TV, nothing. There are no information about this story. So there is a really big problem, mainly for people like Iris and I, because we are our family is the African born, and now we are born in Spain. We are Afro-Spanish people, and we don't have something to have to be. I'm this. I have, these are my roots. This is important also for the generation that their grandfathers, the grandparents live this situation because they don't have any identity. So Spain, the secret around this, the invisibilization around all the African history of Spain, there is not only a problem in education, in administration. This is a problem for the people and for their mental health, because they don't have any identity. So this is a really important fact, and I think that this not happen in other countries.
Thank you. Mohamed, are you going to share?
Yeah, so sorry for like, but we had an emergency. I had to take care of that. Um, I think on like concerning what you just said, I think the issue that you just described is also maybe not only Spain. I think the issue in Spain maybe is bigger because of the context, but it's definitely something because of the different types of migrations we've had. So the focus on non-whites and migrants has been predominantly on, for instance, Turkish people, North Africans, especially Moroccans. So Black people have kind of been left out of that conversation as we were trying to figure out what it then means to be not white in Belgium. Um, Even though Belgium has a very deeply rooted colonial history, it's always been this thing like, oh yeah, we had Congo, and then okay, let's not talk about that, and let's move on, as if other Black people living here, n'importe quoi. So it's always been this very, it's like a very weird dynamic. So for instance, it's very hard to find statistics that, like, it's really hard to find um, basically, if you would look in numbers, it's hard to find where we are in the spectrum of everything that's been collected in research. Even like 2017 was like one of the first ever researched topics about the existence of Black people in Belgium, and where the focus was solely on Black people, because we usually get lost in just lumps in of like everyone that's not white in one category, and then you have like other European people coming in. So it's like this. It's always been this thing where we, of course, know that we're here, and that's why earlier I was making the point of why it's so important for us to have this continuation of who we are, what we're doing in documenting, but also passing that to the generation behind us, because the way Belgium is created, it's either we do the work, the state is not going to do that. And where in the UK, where there's been this very, well, yeah, just because of the British system, of course, there's, you can find numbers of like Black people, even though it's probably also hidden, but you have the access. If you're like a researcher, you could probably access certain statistics. But in Belgium, you can't find us in the numbers, you can't find us in the important spaces in society. So there's this search, especially in this generation, you find like this search we're doing, but actually if we go 15 years back, the generation before us was doing exactly the same thing, but the only difference was they were like more fresher in the continent. The most people now are just born here, second generation, third generation, whilst our fathers and mothers started their first organizations, and they were doing all this work and trying to make sure they pass on culture, like the African cultures they brought with them, but also finding ways to create space where they could be themselves. Because the racism they would endure, for instance, they would not lash out or speak up. They would be like, it's not really my country, so we will just go along and then we will see. So I think maybe in Spain it's bigger of an issue, but in Belgium definitely it's also the case where we're yet to have this standardized thing of like, oh yeah, it's normal to think about Black people being here.
Thank you. Marie, do you want to share your thoughts on that? And your country's relationships with
Yeah.
slavery and
Friends, yeah. I think as many Western countries, France is repressing about is its colonial past and slavery past. There is in France this discourse of color blindness, and there is this myth that there's no race in France, only in the US, and so it's very hard to talk about race in France, and it's very hypocrite because it's a country obsessed by race, as like many Western countries. So yeah, so it's very it will be very hard to, I don't know, it will be very hard, but it will be hard to work with institutions, for example, because of that, because of it. And yeah, for example, because my family comes from Martinique, and Martinique is considered like a French department, but it's not. It's still a colony. White people, the descendants of slave owners, still got the power, and so it's yeah, it's not a colonial past. It's a colonial present for me, because it's still going on, and we are the consequences of it. I think.
There is something interesting that also about the question on how the colonial past, in my case Spain and slavery are related, and it is, I wouldn't say it's a fun fact, but the fact that Spain only colonized Equatorial Guinea not as a colony but as this departmental action where it's just a province. So people born there would be Spanish. They will have an identity card and Spanish names and Spanish surnames and all of that. So the way Spain colonized in Africa was very low key. But when it comes to the Americas, Spain did something that was capturing and kidnapping, trafficking with humans from Africa through Spain, and then sending them. The first Jamaicans, the first Africans arrived to Jamaica arrived from Spain. It was a Spanish company that brought them there. So, and they were captured in Ghana and all around that Gold Coast. And so there was the very good structure, whereas they knew what they were doing. They wouldn't be colonizing in Africa, but they would be colonizing, discovering America, using Africans to, so there is a fact, I want to make sure with this maybe 500 million, I'm not sure if that's the right figure, but let me check this 1 second. But from all the Spanish speakers in the planet, 50% are African, are descendants of Africans. Okay, so half of the Spanish speakers in the world are Black or mixed. That's the point I wanted to make about colonial past and slavery in Spain. It's a big, very big fact.
Also in Spain, we have a really horrible situation with the immigrants. We have 8 internment center for foreigners in Spain, around all, not only in the territory, also in Canary Island, for example, and the situation of the people there is like slavery. They don't have any rights. There are a lot of murder there because this center has a security system, and also this security system is with a white racist men that work there, and there is we know even the identity of the people that died there, but if identity visibilized, also there is a lot of riot because the people that live there they don't have any right, any food, any space to sleep. And I want to show you some images. This is an image of this kind of center in Madrid, and this is a policeman, and always there are a lot of riots of the prisoner because they are prisoners. They only came to Spain without any right. They are prisoners, and also this newspaper said that 6 migrants have died in the CS. It's a Spanish name for internment center for foreign. In the last 10 years, one of them in Valencia. That is one of sample that the situation happened there. And this is not only nowadays. There is this kind of spaces since 1985. So this is a really big problem. Also, the immigrants. I don't know how to say the word mantero. They work in the streets, selling purse, bags, anything like that. And there is always the police has they have been died by the police and the racist system of Spain. And even this is happened, we don't know the identity of the person who died like this. This is happened nowadays in Spain, and also in the Mediterranean Sea. There is a lot of death anytime, in any hour, and also we even know their identities. This is not in the past, this is nowadays. And this is a really big problem. And in our country, the institution always said that there is no racism, there is no problem, there is no problem with immigrants, and this is the reality.
On the back of what Iris was saying earlier, there's an area in Jamaica called Spanish Town, and these when Spain captured Jamaica for about 100 years before the English came and took over. And I think even in the schools, Spanish is like a language that Jamaican children learn, and there's even like a little bit of Spanish incorporated to our language, Jamaican patois. But with colonial links between, like myself and England, again, Jamaica was a part of the British colony, And it's crazy because in like Britain's relationship with like racism, they act like they had no part in slavery. They act like, you know, racism isn't a thing in the UK, but again, they owned like so many enslaved people, and just done everything in the dark. And it revealed to us that up until 2015, the government had been giving compensation, and I'm talking like thousands and thousands of pounds, to the descendants of those who owned enslaved people. But Black people haven't received reparations, and this was coming out of taxpayers' money. And it's a very big slap in the face, because, you know, my parents, my grandparents, and other Black people have been paying taxes, and that tax had gone towards the descendants of those who enslaved us. But no one bats an eyelid when it comes to us and say, oh, no, racism doesn't exist. But this was what was happening up until 2015. So, yeah, so in terms of like archiving and moving forward with Bumpkin files, I'm very protective of where I go and how I navigate with it as well. Because again, a lot of the time, like white institutions take ownership of our things and sell it back to us. So yeah, don't really know what else to add to that, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that thing about the taxpayer thing still makes me mad, because, anyway, for multiple reasons. We have run a little bit over, so I wanted to ask the attendants if they have any questions they wanted to ask, any kind of last burning question they wanted to ask the participants before we wrap up. Also, one attendee have asked if you could share the links for the archives, for every single one of your archives, in the chat box. So if you could do that, that would be great. If there's no other last question, I guess my last one would be, what is the next step? Karis, you already answered that. So yeah, I had a great moment with all of you. I've learned so much, and yeah, to wrap it up, I was just wondering, what are the next steps for you?
The next steps for me, as I mentioned before, is creating exhibitions, creating photo books as well, just having tangible images and findings so it just lasts longer. Like, I love digital, but it's nothing more better than like printed works. Working alongside platforms, and another thing that I would like to do is expand Bumpkin files to other places in Europe as well. So I had like a lot of amazing insight about, you know, like the Black experience in Spain. I've always been intrigued about the Black community in Rotterdam as well. There's like a very big community, we don't hear enough about it. And even going to other European countries like, you know, like Finland, I'm pretty sure there's like a lot of Black people there. And like Poland, I know there's quite a few like Nigerians over there as well. Just widening the scope and just providing visibility and a platform, especially with like what I'm doing in photography. I'm ascending in a way where people are paying attention. So I'd like to kind of join the two together and bring attention to other amazing people, like, you know, you guys doing amazing work. So that's my next step, just growing, expanding, seeing like more of mainland Europe and documenting that, and even possibly going to like even like the States as well, because I'm sure there's also like a very, I wouldn't say a divide, but there's a bit of a gap between like Black city people and Black country people. I'm always intrigued, like seeing like, you know, Black cowboys and like, you know, Black people that living in like near farms and like on horses. It's like so powerful. So that's definitely something I'd like to capture and speak about in my work, and like even making relevances and comparing and seeing similarities and differences between us as a diaspora, like as a whole globally. So yeah.
For me, the next step is continue to work with Iris, because this project Afroespaña is a really important thing in our country. Iris and I, we have a lot of stories. For example, we wanted to share her project as we are doing here, and an institution has I don't know the word to say in English, to vetar. We didn't have the opportunity to share our ideas, and this is an example of the situation that we have to live in Spain. In the institution there is diversity, because this diversity is like marketing, is only for have a good image, and not is because they want to change their system. So it is a fight, a really difficult fight, because we don't have any partner, we don't have any care system to do this idea, this project, not only on internet, also in museums, in college, in university. We don't have this opportunity in Spain, because the institution said, no, we have diversity. We don't believe that racism exists in our institution. So we have a really difficult work to do, and I think that for me, the next step is continue to be in the inside with this project, and continue to help Iris and to grow up to another level. But in Spain, it's really difficult.
I think for us, mostly going forward, like we said, it's really about making those connections with other organizations, like all of you, and other Black organizations in Europe, and nationally, we're always working towards expanding more, connected to having more European cities in Belgium participate in the months, and of course, like working towards really having that archive, that space where we can come to do the work, and having that be owned by the Black community.
Yeah, me too. I would like to continue to create links between Black people living in Europe, like this event. And I continue my archival research on Beaumont and Windrush to cross these two history, and to make, I would like to make an exhibition about it too.
Yeah, next steps, I think I would like to make this statement, a personal statement and commitment to focus on us, because if we counting on next steps to be validated by institutions, and I'm not saying we shouldn't expect that they use our materials, but we need to own everything that we are doing, and we need to think of us first. And then if they want to learn from it, that's and that would be a very good outcome. But when I research or when I create, I think of my children and your children and us in the present and the things that we can learn from each other. And I think my next steps will always be focusing on us getting together to learn from each other and to grow together. We're talking about lack of funding. I rather send an email to 6 organizations that are owned by us and say, let's just put money together and do an event instead of expecting some local racist government or some central government to validate our ideas and say, okay, let's give you an award, the diversity award, the grassroots award, the community award. London, I think Karis might know about this, but it's full of this. There's so many grants and money that you can make. You can actually live on grants and awards and press if you really play the game and if you really like to be in the house. But I commit myself to be a real fil negro, and I rather stay and rather do things online if there's no money, and we rather cook ourselves if there's no money for expensive catering, and we rather do it in someone's house or in wherever if we cannot rent a massive conference center. But I think that is the next steps. I'm not sure which will be, and we're not in the position to plan too much in the middle of a end of a pandemic. In the end, let's say the end of a pandemic, who knows? But at least the commitment would be to do any next steps in this direction always. Yeah, never facing the house, never.
Yeah, I wanted to add something. I think Aminata stated it, I think, in the start of the conversation. I was fortunate to, like, I think 7 years ago, I came in contact with like the whole European project and how those things could be set up. And I think looking at the local politics of most European countries, which is straight out racist, and especially in that field of archiving, museums, and arts, um, I think the chances for us to be able to do what we do and having somewhat of a funding, I'm not saying the European Union is even better than the nation states. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, but when it comes to getting certain grants, it's the most easiest uh, platform at this moment, just because it's so massive. You won't be controlled, and basically your message will not be manipulated as it would be locally, where, as you say, it's a game. If you play along, you will get the money. If you say the right words, if you dress your project in a certain way, you will get the money. And I think for us who are like, nah, we would rather be independent and find ways of working across like European boundaries, um, then I think like the European funds are usually help us to have that freedom, because having done projects, for instance, in Gran Canaria and in Finland as well, what I've seen is this thing is like how especially white institutions find ways to use our stories, our narratives to get funding from the European Union and include us in projects that we could be getting the funds directly. So that's like my biggest uh, way of looking at it in that sense. Is like these white institutions are getting the money using our names, using our stories. We might as well just go and find ways and collaborating and using each other's resources to getting the same funds while we're building those spaces that are much needed to us, because we know they're not possible in our local context. So that I think that's something we've been trying to research, and we continue researching, because next to, yeah, like you said, that's like how Black History Month started. It's like just us, like, yeah, if the mom has to cook, mom will cook. If we're cleaning, we're cleaning. Like, if we need to do it in like a house, whatever, we will do it, because I think in the end it's like something that we're doing from the heart, and it's really about the work itself. It's not about the eyes and spectators. In the end, it's really about the work itself. So we will always do the work, but I think it's also, yeah, it's our taxpayer money. The European Union is funded by us. So I'm like, yeah, let's find ways to get back that money in our own institutions we're trying to build. Yeah.
And in Spain, there is also a big problem that there is a lot of grant, but you must to be Spaniard. You must to be have the identity, the national identity card. If you are an immigrant, also if you have born in Spain, but your parents are from another country, you don't have this card, and there is a problem because the institution said, oh, there is a grant, you can apply to that and to have your project, because there is also Spain, there is a really big lie that you have a lot of opportunities because we have a solid public system, but for the white Spaniards, not for a person who also has born here but don't have this card. So that this is a problem, because all the institutions says to you, you have this opportunity, apply to this grant, but if I can, what is my second chance, my opportunity? And also, for me, it's a really big problem because I miss it, and I have this identity card because I have born here, but I have a one, and I'm working in a national museum, but this is also contribute to this system, and this is a problem. So I'm happy with this grant, but I know that a black person like me, if he or she doesn't have this card, they can apply to my grant, and this is a problem. And also there is a real big belief that in Spain all can happen because we have a really important public system, but it's not for us.
Thank you. Marie-Julie, any last words?
Only thank you for being here and for all your thoughts and sharings, and thank you a lot.
She's going to come back. But yeah, thank you for the different perspectives. Okay, Marie-Julie, we can't really hear you.
What?
Would you mind? We couldn't hear you. Would you mind saying it again?
Okay. No, I was just saying thank you for being here and sharing your thought and your
connection is a bit weird. You're freezing. Yeah, would you mind saying it again?
Yes, I wanted to thank you all for being here. You hear me? It's good. And sharing all your thoughts and works, important works, and let's be connected after that. It's important.
Thank you for setting this up. Thank you so much. It's been very insightful, and it's good to connect with like other other people like across the continent as well. I'm always like seeking, and I like meeting people. So yeah, thank you for holding this space.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very interesting and really a pleasure to meet you all. And I'm sure, yeah, this won't be the last time we'll speak to each other. So.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, if you want to follow Afropea on social media, it's #Afropea. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you guys. We'll stay connected for real. Definitely.
Yes. Bye.
And thank you, Iris, for saying about the funding as well. But I'll shoot you a DM.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, all.